Have you ever noticed yourself going quiet when things get too hard? Your phone sits unanswered. Your messages pile up. The people who love you are reaching out, and somehow, even though you can see their names on your screen, you just can't. You pull back from the world, close the curtains on your social life, and retreat somewhere deep inside yourself, somewhere no one else can follow. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something important before we go any further. You are not broken. You are not cold. And you are not alone. What you are doing has a name, a reason, and a story that likely started long before you were old enough to understand it. There is a particular kind of person who, when life becomes too heavy, doesn't reach outward. They reach inward. They disappear. Not because they don't care about the people around them, but often because they care so deeply that showing their struggle feels unbearable. They would rather vanish quietly than be witnessed falling apart. And the fascinating, heartbreaking truth is that this response, this retreat, is not a personality flaw. It is a coping mechanism. It is a survival strategy that was likely built in childhood, refined through pain, and carried quietly into adulthood, like an old habit that no longer serves its original purpose. To understand why some people disappear under pressure, we have to go back to the beginning. Think about what it was like to be a child in a home where emotions weren't welcomed. Maybe you cried and were told to stop. Maybe you expressed fear and were met with frustration. Maybe the adults around you were so overwhelmed with their own lives that there simply wasn't space for yours. Over time, you learned something dangerous. You learned that your needs were a burden, that your pain made things worse, that the safest thing you could do was to handle it alone, quietly, without making a scene. So you did. You became good at disappearing into yourself. And every time that strategy protected you from rejection or criticism, your brain filed it away as effective. Retreat equals safety. Isolation equals control. This is what psychologists often refer to as an avoidant attachment style, and it shapes far more than just how we handle conflict. It shapes how we experience stress, how we process emotion, and critically, how we respond to the people who try to get close to us during our most vulnerable moments. When someone with an avoidant attachment style hits a wall, a job loss, a relationship rupture, a grief, a failure, the nervous system doesn't say, go find support. It says, go hide. Not out of selfishness, but out of deep conditioned self-protection. What makes this even more complex is that the disappearing often isn't a conscious choice. It doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a fog that rolls in. Suddenly, social interactions feel impossibly draining. Small talk feels like a performance you don't have the energy to put on. Even people you love feel like they require a version of you that you simply don't have access to right now. So you go quiet. You tell yourself you'll reach out when things are better, when you feel more like yourself, when you have something more hopeful to say. But better keeps moving further away, and the silence grows heavier, and the guilt of disappearing starts to compound on top of everything else you were already carrying. This guilt is one of the most painful parts of this pattern because the person who disappears is rarely indifferent. In fact, they are often exquisitely sensitive, deeply aware of how their silence might be affecting others, tormented by the idea that they are letting people down, loving fiercely even while pulling away. They want connection. They ache for it. But something inside them, something older and more primal than logic, tells them that being seen in their overwhelm is not safe, that needing too much will drive people away. That vulnerability is a risk they cannot afford to take right now. And here's what no one tells you about this pattern. It often gets worse the more someone cares about you. Counterintuitive as it sounds, the people you love most can feel the most threatening when you're struggling, because the thought of them seeing you at your lowest, of them growing tired of your pain, of them leaving after witnessing the full weight of you, that fear is unbearable. So you protect yourself preemptively. You leave before you can be left. You disappear before they can see what's happening and decide it's too much. It is, in its own painful way, an act of love, a misguided, self-defeating act of love, but love nonetheless. In everyday life, this pattern shows up in recognizable ways. It's the friend who stops responding to texts during a hard season, then resurfaces weeks later as if nothing happened. It's the partner who becomes emotionally unavailable during stress, building invisible walls that neither of them can quite explain. It's the colleague who used to be warm and engaged and now seems distant, distracted, somewhere else entirely. It's the person who cancels plans not because they don't want to be there, but because the idea of having to perform okay for another person feels like more than they can manage. From the outside, it can look like avoidance, even rudeness. From the inside, it feels like survival. The relational impact of this behavior is real and worth acknowledging, honestly. When one person disappears, the people who love them are left in a painful kind of uncertainty. They don't know if they've done something wrong, if they're being pushed away on purpose, if they should keep reaching out or give space. The connection strains under the silence. And the person who disappeared, watching from their retreat, often feels too ashamed to come back easily, because now they have to explain not just their struggle, but the disappearing itself. The longer the silence stretches, the more impossible the return feels. It becomes its own prison. But here is what I want you to hold on to, especially if this is a pattern you recognize in yourself. Awareness is the beginning of everything. The moment you can name what you're doing, the moment you can say, I am retreating because I am overwhelmed and some old part of me believes that's the only safe thing to do, you create a tiny but powerful space between the impulse and the action. You don't have to stop the pattern overnight. You don't have to suddenly become someone who reaches out effortlessly or sits with vulnerability without flinching. Healing is not that sudden, and it doesn't need to be. What it does require is small, intentional acts of courage. Sending one message instead of going completely silent. Telling one person, I'm struggling right now and I'm pulling back. It's not about you. Letting yourself be seen, even imperfectly, even briefly, by someone safe. These small moments of connection, however awkward or incomplete they feel, are how you begin to rewrite the story your nervous system has been telling you for years. The story that says needing others is weakness. The story that says disappearing is safer than being known. You are allowed to need people. You are allowed to reach out when things fall apart, even when every instinct inside you says to hide. You are allowed to be witnessed in the messy, unfinished, overwhelming middle of a hard season, not just in the polished, recovered version of yourself on the other side. The people who truly love you are not waiting for a better version of you to return. They are reaching for the real one, the struggling one, the one who has convinced themselves they must always disappear to survive. You don't have to disappear anymore. The world, and the people in it who love you, can hold far more of you than you have ever allowed them to try. And perhaps that is the most courageous thing you could discover. Not that you are strong enough to endure alone, but that you are worthy enough to be held.